And hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great evening. I'm Joe, the host. I'm the host of Beyond the Woodline. Um, I'm still flying solo yet again tonight. Shannon apparently had to work, so it'll just be me, myself, and I, and of course Preston Dennett. Is that how you pronounce your name, Preston Dennett?
That's right.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, I meant to ask you that before we went on, but we got on kind of late. Then we had a little bit of technical difficulties there. And greetings from Atlanta. That's Dr. William Lester. I know him anywhere. He doesn't have to have a have a name. He's a good guy, man. If you ever get a chance to meet him, just remember that name, William Lester. He's a great guy, doctor of anthropology, as a matter of fact. But
Nice.
yeah, man, he's a good dude. Really smart, brilliant, and loves cigars too. So, uh, so Preston, man, you got quite the resume, man. You are an investigator for MUFON, uh, ghost hunting, paranormal investigator, and you're an author of several books and several articles. What got you involved in all this in this crazy little genre that we're involved in?
Yeah. Well, glad to say the genre is used to be a lot littler than it is now. It's getting
Right.
big.
Yeah.
But I was actually not into any of this. I was very skeptical, vehemently skeptical. Did not believe in ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot. No, life after death. None of it.
Yeah.
And really resisted it because I heard about it every now and then, but it was back
Right.
in 1986, November 17th, actually, and I heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska, and I thought to myself, this poor pilot, what? He must be deluded. He's an idiot. He's lying. He thinks he saw a UFO. He's sadly mistaken.
Okay.
Uh, but I was intrigued because he was flying a Japanese commercial airliner,
Mhm.
and apparently he wasn't the only witness. The whole news report was very tongue in cheek. They kind of just joked about it, laughed nervously, and moved on. But I thought, wow, this pilot is throwing away his reputation. I wonder why he would do that.
Mhm.
And I remembered my brother Mark, my older brother. He's like, 4 years older than me, maybe 5. And he had said he'd seen a UFO. This was about 8 years before that, 7. And I'm like, Mark, did you hear about this crazy pilot? He's like, no. I'm like, yeah, this pilot saw a UFO. Didn't you said you see one? You saw one? He's like, oh yeah, I told you. And I'm like, well, tell me again. And he told me this incredible sighting that he had with his 2 friends. They actually chased this object down Reseda Boulevard here in Southern California.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just a few miles from where I'm at right now, actually. Uh, so that's kind of what pierced this armor of my skepticism. And yeah, I'll call it armor because I was a thick skinned skeptic. Uh, and found out that he wasn't the only one in my family. I mean, my sister in law had a sighting. She had 2 friends with her. That was shocking. I always thought people who saw UFOs were alone. That was absolutely not true. I had friends who had sightings, turned out. I started asking everybody. Yeah, I had a friend named Sylvia, pilot, private pilot, and a flight instructor. She described a really incredible sighting with her friend. And I brought it up at work. Worked full time. And the lady whose desk was right next to mine, uh, known her for quite some time. She's like, oh, yeah, I believe in UFOs. Me and my whole family saw one. Like, really? She's like, yeah. With the star-like object, it was darting around. And turned out her daughter had seen them several times and had visitations by gray ETs. So, yeah, this hit home for me. That's how I got involved. I was upset. I was not happy.
So, have you yourself had any sightings?
Yeah, I sure have. I really, hearing all these people I knew who had had encounters, I was first really upset and somewhat intrigued, became even more intrigued, quickly became obsessed. when I realized this was a real phenomena, it had been researched for decades. I'm like, I want to see one. If they've, if my brother's seen one and my sister-in-law and my friends and people I work with, what's wrong with me? Why haven't I seen one? So I started going out there doing my research, not only buying books and joining MUFON and other organizations, but I was tromping through the fields. I was going to places where people said they were seeing UFOs. And it took a while. The first sighting I had was 4 years, let me think, it was 1992 about that I had my first real sighting. And boy, that year was a big one. I ended up having like 4 sightings that year. And man, oh man, it just snowballed from there. I've had a bunch of sightings.
So what did that do for you? So when you joined this group, you hadn't actually had a sighting. Were you still kind of skeptical?
I wouldn't say I was skeptical. I was confused because it was clear to me this was real. At some point, it didn't take that long for me to realize this is a real phenomena. I would say maybe 3 or 4 months before I'm like, okay, this has to be real. It has to be. There's too many people seeing it. They're describing the same things. It's been researched for decades. There's a cover-up. I was pretty naive about all of it, but I quickly started reading everything. And I couldn't say I was skeptical, but seeing is believing for sure. There's nothing quite like a personal sighting.
Right. So, how good of a look did you get?
Oh, initially it's anomalous lights, but eventually did see a metallic craft. Probably one of my best sightings was I had hooked up with this contactee.
Okay.
Well, I was interviewing her, not hooked up. But
Okay.
she was a good friend. Let me be clear. And I had interviewed her because she said she had been taken on board and seen grays and had hybrid babies and the whole deal. This was a full-on, very extensive contact case with gray type ETs. And she's like, well, because I'm trying to sort of vet her case, if you know what I mean. I was interviewing her family members, her friends, and everyone around her was seeing UFOs. And like when she moved into California here, Southern California in Acton, there was a wave of sightings over her house, over where she lived. She says, this always happens to me. They follow me everywhere. I'm like, well, I want to see one. Is actually how it started. Was I was transcribing an interview with her, and I was in my 3-story condo in Canoga Park. I lived on the 3rd floor, and I'm transcribing an interview that I had done with her, in which she described how she jumped up one early morning. There were grays surrounding her bed. She completely freaked out, jumped up and kicked one in the neck and snapped its neck.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, that's what I said. I'm like, holy cow. Really? And she's like, yeah. And by this point, I had read many books, and I instantly thought of another encounter where someone essentially did the same thing. But it was just one. It was just one case that I could think of. Now I know of several. But I was kind of shocked by it. And I thought to myself, all right, I'm pretty sure she's telling the truth. But this is a lot for me to wrap my head around. I know she believes it. She had lots of corroborative evidence. She hadn't read any books on UFOs. I went to her house. I looked. And she was telling me things that she wouldn't know. Like what the inside of a UFO looks like and all these little details that weren't as well known back then, certainly.
Right.
But I was trying to wrap my head around it. And I'm like, I wonder if she's telling me the truth. When I got this really strong impulse that I could not resist to go onto the roof of my condo, which is against the HOA rules.
Right.
And I'm a good boy. I don't go on the roof of the condo. But I did. I couldn't help myself. I actually grabbed my glasses, which I use for driving, I ran all the way down to my car, grabbed my glasses, and ran up to the roof and onto the roof. And I thought, what am I doing? What the heck am I doing up here? When I was up there 10 seconds, maybe 20, and this light appears, and it was right across the street. It was bright orange. It was fairly large. I'm going to guess maybe 10 feet across, maybe 15. Fiery orange, and right at treetop level. And it blasts me with a message, which that's new to me. I had never had anything of what I would call telepathy until then. And it gave me a message, not in so many words, but I understood it. It said, "Hi, it's us. We're Wendy's ETs. You don't believe, huh? Watch this. We're real. Watch what we can do. We'll prove this to you." And they started darting back and forth in like 20, 30, 50 foot sweeps, back and forth, getting lower and lower and lower until they were right at rooftop level. And this, I tell you, this is like 200 feet away. So very convincing, obviously unexplained. That was the first one that really bowled me over.
Yeah. I've heard of that movement before. Where people have, but I haven't heard of that of what happened to you. Physically, getting the message. But I've heard of that movement. Going back and forth. That's pretty cool. I don't know how common that is, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was amazed. I called her up. I'm like, "Oh my God, Wendy, you're not gonna believe this." And she ended up taking me out to see UFOs again, and they came much closer. We went out to, where was it? Pasadena, off the 210 freeway, and climbed up on this hill. She said, the ETs said they would come. I asked her, can you set up a meeting? And she said she'd try. She says she's in telepathic contact. She can do it. I'm like, okay, let's try this. And I had tried this with other people, and it never works. So I was not thinking anything was going to happen. But no sooner had we got there. I mean, literally, we just got to the location, and she screams and grabs my shoulders and turns me around. And there was this huge sphere covered with golden lights, so beautiful. And it was about 50 feet up, maybe 20, 50 feet away. I mean, right there, like in your yard, you know what I mean? Like right there. And as big as a house, a small house,
right?
But big and totally silent. It was so beautiful. We were jumping up and down and screaming. It was amazing.
And I can imagine that. It's interesting that you talk about the telepathy, or that she was connected to the telepathic. Because you hear that too, but you don't really see that too much, like on TV shows. They don't really talk about that. You might. I'm even trying to think. I don't even know if I've even seen it on a TV show. I'm sure there probably somebody's talked about it, but it doesn't get covered as much as I think it probably should.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I guess you're right, huh?
I don't think I've ever seen it.
It's pretty much a regular part of this. I mean,
right.
If you dig into the whole UFO phenomena, that is how ETs communicate. Almost, well, I don't want to say exclusively, but pretty much always. Right. They will telepathically tell a person, don't be afraid. We won't hurt you.
Right. So, do you think that once a person is linked, they're always linked? You know what I'm trying to say? Or does that does that person have control of that link?
I think to a certain extent, yeah. Once they have introduced themselves to you, you are on their list, so to speak. Right. They know about you. You're on their radar. Some people do have just one sighting, and maybe that's all they need to sort of join the club, so to speak.
Right.
But yeah, I think once you have one sighting, increases your chances of having another, and you can reach out to them and become what we would call a contactee.
Okay.
And it took me a while to even say those words in regards to myself, because I don't think of myself like that way.
Right.
I mean, the people I interview, they're being taken on board and having regular encounters.
Mm-hmm.
And one day it occurred to me, like, well, I did have one missing time encounter.
Really?
And yeah, and I have seen UFOs more, a dozen times at least, and had some pretty profound, what I would call UFO dreams. I'll put that in air quotes, but I'll underline it too, because these are not normal dreams. So yeah, I think once they contact you and reach out, you do have sort of open lines of communication with them, depending on how much you put into it.
Okay. That makes sense. And so real quick, several years ago, I mean, it was probably a good 20 years at right in that area. I was fishing in Galveston. I was with someone else, another gentleman. We were on the jetties, and he's maybe 60 feet down to my right. And he says, "Hey, Joe, look," and he points up to our left. So I look up, and I'm looking up, and there's this craft, and it's maybe like 300 feet above us. Clear night, all the stars, the moon is out. I don't remember how full the moon was, but it was pretty full because it was really, really bright. And we saw this craft coming right above us. It was round like a disc. On the bottom, it had like this little dome on the bottom. It was black, and they had maybe 3 or 4 little black sections that went around the bottom also. And this thing was so smooth, and it just glided ever so slowly, no sound, no wobble. I mean, this thing was just moving just so slow. And we were like maybe 2 or 3 miles down from the airstrip there in Galveston, like all the single engine planes come in, and you can hear them suckers buzzing all the way down there, you know. And this thing was like literally right above us, no noise, no sound. Um, yeah, it was just it was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I mean, it was just so slow. The airspeed was just so slow. I don't see how it stayed in the air, you know. And we watched it a good 5 minutes before it just got out of sight. You know, that's how slow it was going. We were just staring at it. We couldn't believe what we had seen. And he's like, "What did we see? What did we see?" I said, "Man, I don't know." I said, "Whatever it was, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't.
Aliens.
Yeah, it wasn't an airplane. It wasn't a helicopter. So we got a good look at it for, like I said, at least a good 5 minutes,
You
and it
know,
was noticeable.
I personally think this is extraterrestrials. These are ETs. These are
Right?
people like us from other planets. And if it's that close, when someone sees a sighting within 100 feet, 200, 300 feet,
Yeah.
this is, and this is my assessment. This is an intentional display, or a sort of a howdy do, a
Right?
hello. They know when they're being observed, and they're doing it on purpose. And if someone has
Yeah.
maybe a distant sighting way up in the sky, that's one thing.
Mm.
But the closer it gets, that's when people start to have actual contact. And I've come to realize if it's within a few hundred feet, this is very likely deeper levels of contact. It might be telepathic. It might prelude further encounters, or it could be actual contact that's perhaps shrouded in missing time,
Mhm.
because that's often hard to recognize. People don't know that they've had a missing time. It can slip by you very easily if you're not watching your watch really closely.
Well, I watched my watch. I sure did. So I know there was no missing time there because I was already interested in the subject. I was already following it very closely at that time, and I wasn't as in deep as I am now. But man, I looked down at my watch. I don't remember what time. It was like 2:30, something like that. I remember it was late at night, 2:30, 3 o'clock. Yeah, right in that ballpark. I wanted to make sure I wasn't abducted and probed or anything. Yeah, but
Yeah, well, they're aware of people who are researching them. That's another thing I found out, because I'm like, how did I go my whole life without seeing one? Start researching them, and then bam, 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 I'm seeing them.
right.
It's because I think they're aware, and if you are thinking about them and calling out to them, they often come down. I started surveying all of these researchers, and a lot of them have seen UFOs. That's how Bud Hopkins got involved.
Really?
He had a personal sighting. I don't think David Jacobs or John Mack ever admitted to one, but I know many researchers who have. Brad Steiger, Barbara Lamb, Edith Fiore. She was the first person with a PhD to write about abductions. She was taken on board. She
Right.
absolutely believed she had a full-on onboard experience.
Right. I've talked to a few people who've had this very strange um, contact encounter where they were in their house, in their room, whatever. They wake up and they'll see like a little gray alien standing at the door.
Right.
What? Just out of the blue. Not like they were out in the forest or out on a long drive, but in their house. What do you think that's about? I mean, apparently you've heard of that kind of encounter, and at least a couple times it's only been like a one-time thing, and that was it.
Yeah.
At least to their knowledge. Yeah.
Which is a good point, because this can slip by people's conscious awareness, particularly if they're in a state of denial or fear.
Right.
But they do this. The Greys will pop in for a house visit. This is actually far more common than I think people realize, even within the UFO community.
Yeah.
Contact is not like super rare. There was a quote that I read from J. Allen Hynek, who I'm sure you must have heard of him if you're in this
Right. Yeah.
field,
Yeah.
the Blue Book guy, the astronomer. He said 1 in 40 people have had contact, an onboard experience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was my thought. I'm like, that's too many. That means I know someone who's been taken on board.
Right.
So this was very early on in my research, like late 1980s. And that's what really got me to start asking everybody. And I ended up writing an article called 1 in 40 for the MUFON journal.
Okay.
Because I surveyed all these researchers, like Bud Hopkins and Jacques Vallée and Tim Beckley, and basically built an argument or a case that there was a hidden epidemic of contact. That this sort of thing, Greys popping into people's bedroom, is not uncommon. And they published it, and it was 1 year later that the Roper poll, the Roper organization, does polls on various subjects, and they tackle the UFO subject, particularly abductions or contactees. How many people are contactees? And they did a big survey, thousands of people, asked all these questions. And some of these questions had little hidden markers in them that would indicate if you were a contactee, such as, have you had a close-up UFO sighting? Have you had missing time? Do you have unexplained scars? Have you seen little orbs in your house? This sort of thing. And they found 1 in 50 people. The editor was so impressed, he called me up and said, "Wow, you predicted it." I'm like, "Well, it wasn't me. It was John Hynek, but thanks." But the point is, this is far more common. Greys are contacting lots of people. I don't think this is a malevolent phenomena. I don't think they're demonic. I don't think they're here to eat us for lunch. I don't think they're here to hurt people or scare them. I think they do have multiple agendas. Okay. And some are self-serving, as we might think of it. I wouldn't use that term, but I know some people feel that way, because they are doing the whole hybrid babies. And many contactees have talked about this. They don't know each other.
Right.
And they tell the same story. The Greys have had some trouble with their genetics due to space travel or radiation exposure or this sort of thing. Along these lines, there's variations in the story, but it's the same basic outline, that they're having trouble reproducing. And this is why they are contacting a lot of people and taking genetic material. But over and over again, they are warning people. They are talking about the dangers of nuclear proliferation, the dangers of our warlike ways, dangers of pollution. This is a big, big deal for them. They are absolutely very concerned about how we are treating ourselves and our planet. Because initially I got into this field, I'm like, oh my gosh, is this good for us? This does not sound good. Are people being kidnapped against their will? Or are they being kidnapped and operated on by aliens? What is going on here? And what I found is, yeah, people are being taken on board.
Right.
They are being physically examined. And yes, that can be really scary. And some people have such a strong fear reaction that they immediately think this must be evil.
Right.
You know? And but is it really?
Right.
I don't think so, because the ETs are not trying to hurt people. They're not trying to scare them. They're telling you, don't be afraid. You know, we're not going to hurt you. And in fact, they heal people. This is when I started to really get a grip on what's going on here. There are cases of people who have suffered medically, perhaps. Often it's like eye strain, or they'll have flash burn from UFO, or if they get too close to a landed UFO and suffer what looks like radiation sickness,
Right.
or things like this, perhaps struck by a beam of light and suffer a burn or a sunburn type of thing. But I found a lot of healing cases. They are healing people. That lady I mentioned, Wendy, said that she was healed of a cyst. And that's when I dug in deep, and I immediately found 30 or 40 cases. It was the subject of my first book. I found 100 cases after a year of research. And I've come to realize this is one of their main agendas. This is one of several reasons why I don't buy into the alien threat narrative, not for a second. These guys are not here to hurt us. They're not here to take over our planet. The evidence does not support that at all.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you on that. But I know people who are angry that they get taken, and because it's borderline harassment, really, and or like being waking up in the middle of the night and see them standing outside their windows, and they can't tell anybody this because people are looking like they're crazy. But yeah, I have heard of them healing people. I remember there was one famous case where the guy, he was a big time smoker, and they gave him like this box of like all this black gunk in it. So this is what we, and then basically told the guy, you know the story, right?
Yeah, Jim Sparks.
There you go. Yeah, and they told him this is what was in you. Basically, is what they told him. Yeah,
they said this is our gift to you. He's like,
yeah.
what?
Here you go. Right. And then you talk about people who have gotten burned or maybe getting too close to the craft. Isn't that basically what happened to Travis Walton? Well, or at least what he thinks is that they didn't actually hit him with anything or try to hurt him, but I think he talked about that. He thinks it was probably the process of them starting their craft up, and he got hit with their energy, and they probably took him on board and fixed him up. But
electrical discharge.
Right.
Yeah, there are a few cases of that where people have gotten too close. That's what usually happens. Because I was looking at the injury cases, and a lot of them do seem to be accidental. I am not going to say all, and my heart goes out to people who have had negative encounters.
Right.
Because I do think that does happen. I am interested in this, though, because sometimes people will term it negative, and other people will term it positive, and they're having essentially the same encounter. And what I have found is people who get over their fear start to be treated quite a bit differently. And I think why some people think this is negative and they're harassing me and I don't like it and they're evil is because they're pulled on board. They have a very strong fear reaction, and the ETs are like, oh my God, this person is having a very strong fear reaction. And so what they do is they will paralyze them so they don't lash out and kill them, because these grays are not particularly muscular
and pretty fragile. Right?
Yeah, and so they do render people paralyzed, and that's not fun if you're looking at a gray and Suddenly you can't move. And then they will put them back and erase a lot of their memories. But the nature of the human mind is that traumatic events sort of surface pretty quickly
Right.
into our awareness. So a person is left with these terrible flashbacks and a lot of fear and PTSD and trauma and nightmares and little marks on their body. And they're like, what is going on? This is bad for me. And often what I will hear from people who keep having experiences is at some point they do get past their fear, and that's when they're treated quite differently. They're given freedom of movement. They're shown the engine room. They're taken to the helm, the control room.
Right.
They're sat in the chair and told how to. They let them fly the craft. This is not unusual.
Yeah.
I am being totally honest here. This is actually very consistent. And if a person has like 1, 2, 3 onboard encounters, at some point they do start to overcome their fear. Often, some don't. They're like, "That's it." They don't want to deal with it. They're shut down. They're like, "Go away! I don't like you. I don't want to be a part of this." But others move forward and start to have really deeply spiritual encounters and get quite a bit out of it. The ETs teach people how to do healing. They will teach you how to do past life recall and out-of-body travel. And I mean, the whole psychic, spiritual aspect of this is often overlooked. And it's a major part of it. They are trying to wake us up to who we truly are and what we can actually do. Clairvoyance, precognition. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to are contactees who are super psychic on multiple levels. They're mediums. They can do channeling. I mean, it's very common.
So why do it one person at a time?
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily one person at a time. A lot of onboard encounters, the person is alone, but that's not always the case. Like Betty and Barney Hill, they were taken together. Betty Andreasen and her husband, Bob Luca, have been taken together. The Allagash Four, Ray Fowler's case. There was, of course, the 2 fishermen from Pascagoula, Mississippi, Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson. But they do seem to be doing sort of a grassroots movement and contacting small, one person, small groups of people. They are following family lines.
And I have heard of people remember, when they do the hypnosis, where they remember going to a room and there was like several other people there. So I do remember hearing.
That happened to Whitley Strieber. He was taken into a room and there was, it was filled with people.
Right.
A guy interviewed in England, same thing. He's not happy about the Greys either. He feels like this was not necessarily good for him.
Yeah.
And I respect that.
Yeah. So just real quick, what are the Greys? Are the Greys a species, or are the Greys a worker? Are they a drone of some type? Or what's your opinion, or what do you think?
Well, judging on the people I've interviewed and everything I've read, it's my assessment that the Greys are a species that is very much like us and essentially have the same genetics, but are genetically damaged. And this is why they have, large eyes and, no hair, grayish skin. Many cases where they've told contactees, we once looked like you. And the fact that they are interbreeding with people or, hybridizing would point towards similar genetics at the very least. I think there's probably different types of Greys. Certainly, we have a wide variation in our species. I mean, just look at the pygmies all the way to, the Watusi. And that's just in Africa. We have every variation of skin color on this planet. And huge variation in what we look like, but we're all the same species. And I think that's what we see with grays. Some people describe very pale white skin. Others will describe tannish, yellowish, bluish, greenish, little green men. No, not joking there, but yeah, that's some people do see that, and they can range in height as well, from 3 to 4 feet all the way up to 6 feet. It's not unusual, but I will say it's pretty clear that some of these, what we would call grays, are androids, biological android type things. This turns up in case after case where people describe, that some of these beings aren't quite alive as we would think of it. But it's a complex subject. I mean, the UFOs themselves are apparently embodied. They're alive. Many people talk about this. And this was something that took me a while to really wrap my head around. I'm not sure I completely understand it. But yeah, apparently the ships themselves have a consciousness and an awareness and are a being as we would think of it.
Yeah, who was the guy when he invented rockets when he was a kid? He talks about when he first saw one, he kind of touched it, and he said it was organic.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. Oh, I forget his name.
Yeah, he has a great story too. I'm sorry, I forgot his name, but he has a great story. If I remember his name, I got to post it in my group.
Yeah, maybe it'll come to me. I know exactly who you're talking about. He's
Yeah,
been on the lecture circuit,
yeah,
and he talked about how these craft seem to be alive.
right.
And it's definitely something I've heard from contactees. I remember one guy interviewed driving along the 5 freeway late at night with his friend, and he was a huge UFO. I hate that word buff or enthusiast or believer, but he had been researching UFOs, let me put it that way. And it's sort of a laid back way. He wasn't like actively interviewing people, but certainly had bought a bunch of books and always wanted to see one. And sure enough, he's driving with his friend. He's driving. He always drives when he's in the car. He will not get in the car unless he can drive. And they see something ahead of him on the road, on the freeway. This is late at night, so there's no other traffic. I'm thinking, well, what is that? Is that a helicopter? Is that a plane? It's hovering. It's got colored lights. There's a weird fog around it. Maybe it's a crop dusting helicopter. They're trying to figure it out as they're getting closer and closer. And he said, as they drew alongside it, it starts landing next to the freeway. And he said he was sure this thing was alive, that it was a living creature. And he could feel that it was looking at them and was coming to get them. And he felt like he was nothing more than a bug to it. He always thought he would love to see a UFO. And he said that was not his actual reaction. He says, as it landed alongside the road, it sent down a beam of light. And it was playing across the field, and it started coming towards their car. And that's when he and his friend both got really frightened. And this beam, sure enough, it hit them. And the next thing they know, it's gone. They're farther along on the road. And like an hour has gone by, and he's no longer driving. He's in the passenger seat. His friend is driving. And they couldn't even talk. They tried to talk to each other, and they just couldn't do it. It came out as nonsense words. They're like, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if that's the trauma or what was going on there. And they didn't even discuss it for over a year afterwards. They just completely denied it.
I've heard that too, where people don't talk about that for a year or so, and I guess whatever it is finally wears off, and they were able to talk about that. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it happened to me. I know exactly what that's like because my first actual real good sighting, I was driving along in 1992 down this little street called Golondrina in Woodland Hills. I had just been visiting my brother and sister-in-law, and I was going crazy talking about UFOs. I'm like, I'm out of my mind. I'm like, the world is being invaded. The sky is falling. Why isn't anyone talking about this? What is going on? And they're like, it's getting late. Don't you have to work tomorrow? I'm like, yeah, I better. So it was like 11:30 or so, and I'm driving home through Woodland Hills, which is a very dense suburb, but it's just a tiny little street, no cars on it. And I'm coming around this hairpin corner at about 2-3 miles an hour. It's a very, very tight corner. And I saw a bird swooping towards my car from like 300 feet up. And I look up and it's not a bird. I'm thinking, oh my God, it's a fireworks. Because, it's late July. And I'm like, well, that's not a firecracker because here it comes. And boom, it's right in front of my car. It's this ball of light, like a little smaller than a tennis ball, bigger than a golf ball, and bright yellow, not like glaring or anything. It didn't hurt your eyes, but it was solid. And it stopped right in front of my windshield, a foot away. I mean, as close as I am to the computer, right here, close. And it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, stops, goes over the hood of my car, dips down, almost touches the asphalt of the street, goes straight up. I lean forward and I watch it go through the trees, straight up, and it's a dot and it's gone. And that's all I remember. I don't remember driving home. And I forgot about it. I didn't tell anybody for, I don't know how long, months, maybe up to a year even. So one day I just remembered. I'm like, oh my God. And yeah, it took me a while. It took me longer than that to realize I probably had missing time because I don't remember driving home. And I would have. I've seen UFOs before. You remember after you're like, what? You're buzzing. You write it down. You call up your friends. I didn't do any of that. So, yeah, that's my missing time encounter.
That's a pretty good story, though. So let me ask you this: I'm from the cryptid world originally. Look for Bigfoot and any other cryptids I can find, but oftentimes Bigfoot gets lumped in there with the UFOs and aliens, and some are even say that Bigfoot is an alien itself. What are your thoughts about the UFO and the cryptid connection? Is there a connection?
Yeah, I think there is, and I resisted Bigfoot because I having been involved with UFOs, I quickly started hearing about ghosts and near-death experiences and precognition, and I started researching all of it because a lot of the people who were experiencers were having a lot of paranormal experiences. And so I ended up becoming a ghost hunter and researching all aspects of the paranormal and resisted Bigfoot. I was really afraid it might be real. And I didn't really want to go there. I thought it was a can of worms. And I'm like, And then I get this report from a guy named Robert, who was a radiologist from Canyon Country, who had a UFO land in his backyard. I'm like, oh, this is a great case. What happened? And he's describing it, blue and white lights. He lived in an area that's fairly rural. It overlooks the LA National Forest, a huge wilderness area. And he's describing this, thing that landed in his yard and took off. And he says, then that very next night, I had a Bigfoot encounter. I'm like, what? He says, yeah, it was in the same exact place too. And it was reading my mind and I was reading its mind. We had telepathic contact. I'm like, really? He says, yeah, I was really afraid, or it didn't like the dogs. And it was really pissed off. He had dogs that were just going crazy. And this thing roared several times, he said, really loud. And following this, he found footprints and so forth, and it went away at some point. But following this, he had a huge poltergeist outbreak in his house. So I'm like, okay, here's one of those classic cases I've kind of read about a few times where there's all these phenomena perfectly intersect. And so I dug deep and found a bunch of cases that, in a very 1% less less than 1% of Bigfoot cases, less than 1% of UFO cases. The phenomena perfectly intersect, and to a degree where people have seen Bigfoot coming out of a UFO. There are cases, Bigfoot going into a UFO, Bigfoot in the same area, right under a UFO. It's super rare, statistically speaking. I mean, statistically speaking, it's insignificant. But the fact is, there's some 50 cases that you can march out. And I'm sure you could find 100 if you dug real deep. I wrote about this in one of my books, actually. And so, yeah, I think there is a connection. I'm not sure what it is. That was not my first, that was my first Bigfoot UFO case, but not my last. That same lady I mentioned earlier, Wendy, calls me up one day. She's like, Bigfoot is harassing me. She also lived on the outskirts of the LA National Forest. And I did my research. There were Bigfoot sightings where Robert, the radiologist, lived. There was a history of sightings there. I ended up writing a book on Bigfoot. And ended up having my own encounter. I had my own Bigfoot encounter when I went researching Wendy's case, because her son saw it. Her roommate saw it looking inside the window. It climbed the tree next to her house and cracked the branch. She said she was in telepathic contact. I'm like, oh my gosh, here's another telepathy case. And that does turn up in Bigfoot cases.
Right.
And she's like, I think it's going to kidnap me. Does that ever happen? I said, no one's ever been kidnapped by Bigfoot. Boy, was I wrong. I found out that that's not true. That has happened.
Right. Yeah.
And I had to tell her, I'm like, oh, yes, that. I was someone new to Bigfoot at that point.
Right.
She's like, it's going to kidnap me. I'm like, no, it's not likely. But it has happened. There are a few scattered cases. At any rate, she's like, I think I know where it lives. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, it's just a few miles from my house. I live off LA National Forest. I can show you where I think it lives. And so we went out there one night at dusk. We brought our cameras and sound equipment, and we went down this dirt road winding into the forest. And this is in Acton, in Southern California, on the north side of the LA National Forest, which has a history of encounters. Her area does. I looked it up. And it's not just her seeing this stuff. And we get there, and she's, I drove. She's pulling out the equipment from the back seat, and I'm walking out in front of the car. And this thing roars. We hear this loud roar. And she screams and jumps into the car, and she's out of her mind. And this thing, I'm looking around trying to think, where is this thing? Because it's loud. It echoes all around you when this happens. It vibrates your chest. And I'm looking, I thought it was a plane, jet swooping over me is what I thought it was for a second. But then it roared again. And when you hear a sound more than once, you can kind of triangulate, pinpoint it. And it was right in this canyon where she said, which was a super steep, very brushy, almost impassable canyon. It's very dark. You couldn't see in it. I go running towards it because I wanted to, see it.
Brave man.
Yeah, perhaps stupid, because she absolutely lost her mind when I did that. She's like, "You get back in the car right now. We're leaving." So I she was so upset that I capitulated. I went back in the car and we drove off.
Well, that tell you what, man. I know a lot of guys who would not run towards that.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, but I don't know. For some reason, when I see a UFO, I run towards it. When it's here, all the ghost activity, I'm like, ooh, I'm going towards it. The paranormal doesn't scare me.
So have you had a paranormal experience or an encounter, or?
Oh, yeah. Experiences with ghosts as well. Going to haunted houses, you do experience activity. I would say probably one of the most dramatic was in the living room of this house. And they were having, the daughter was having like poltergeist problems. And suddenly there's a explosion in the kitchen. which is kind of blocked off by cabinets and the countertop.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really see perfectly into the kitchen. It's not an open floor plan, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the weirdest sound. Now, I've certainly heard people describe it in interviews. And they're like, it's like furniture moving and glass breaking and pots and pans banging together. And that's exactly what it was like, almost cartoonish in a way, because it was so loud, so long. It was a good 5 seconds. I mean, you freeze when that happens. This is your first. And you could even hear little springs going off, like doing, 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 and glass tinkling and a rumbling. And I mean, it's like covers the whole spectrum of, low sounds to high. And as it's ending, I go running in there, and there's nothing. There is nothing. And I open the pantry, thinking, well, maybe something's in the pantry. There was a door. No. I started opening all the cabinets, opened the refrigerator. The kitchen was perfectly clean. There's nothing in the sink. That was so weird. But yeah, that was probably the biggest, really weirdest one. I did see a medium once who could do physical mediumship. Have you heard of table tipping?
I've heard of it. I know I've heard of it. What exactly is that?
It's like any form of sort of a physical mediumship, but instead of using a Ouija board per se, you use a table.
Yeah, okay. You actually use a table, right? And it doesn't like move or levitate or something like that too, or
exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And in her case, it would stand up on 2 legs and would go down. It would like go down once for yes, twice for no. It was amazing. I watched her do it with people, and then I got on it with a bunch of people. I'm like, okay, I want to do an experiment. Do you mind if everyone gets off the table and it's just me and the medium? And they agreed. And I'm like, okay, Donna, that was her name. Can you do it with just one hand? Put one hand, because I wanted to make sure she wasn't, tricking me. And so she lays her hand on the table and it goes right up. I'm like, wow, put one finger, just your fingertip, one finger. And she did, and it went right up. And at one point I got to do it without anybody. And that table was going chugga, 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 chugga. I couldn't get it to go up. I guess I'm not a medium. But I did it, and I inspected that table. I can tell you, it was amazing.
Yeah, that'd be something to see. Yeah, I've never seen it, but yeah, I've heard about it, and I think you're the first person I've talked to that has physically seen it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I like to dive in the deep end. It's fun to hear people's stories, but I want to do it. I want to see it.
So, is there anything else that you haven't done that you want to do? I mean, you've had a paranormal experience, you've seen UFOs, you've had a Bigfoot encounter. I mean, what else is there? The Loch Ness monster, maybe, or
yeah, I would love to see some more cryptids. That would be awesome. I'd love to levitate, because I've interviewed people who physically levitated. Human levitation is a real phenomenon, verified in a laboratory setting over and over again, all cultures across our planet, cases stretching back hundreds of years. That would be awesome. I've never done that. I have done out-of-body exploring. Because people were telling me about going out of body, and I'm like, well,
yeah, that's what kind of ask you kind of that stuff too. Have you ever tried remote viewing, or have you ever done it, or?
Yeah, did remote viewing successfully.
Did you really? That's pretty cool.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. It was difficult first because I hate guessing games, really. You know what I mean? And you're like, what impressions are you getting?
Right.
And if you get to a certain state of mind that's very centered, and all your extraneous thoughts of like, what did I have for dinner? Did I pay my bills? What was that movie about? And all this stuff that's constantly going through your mind, that song that you can't get out of your head, Cars for Kids, that song. But yeah, if you center yourself and get to a certain state of mind, it actually works quite well. I was doing experiments with my family, and we got some really good hits. I've done several experiments with it. I'd like
Did
to do
your family
it
do it too?
to a certain extent. My sister-in-law,
Okay.
Kisara, has worked really closely with me
Okay.
investigating. She's had encounters with entities, full on, face to face, lots of paranormal experiences. So she's super psychic. And so, yeah, we've experienced telepathy. Absolutely. Telepathy. uh, and yeah, the out of body stuff I've done, telepathy, remote viewing, levitation would be so awesome because I've talked to people who've experienced that. And I'm like, wow,
Mhm.
that is something else. That would be something to experience.
But you haven't seen that yet? And I'm saying yet because eventually I think you're going to see it.
No, I haven't seen it firsthand. I've seen films. I've talked to people. Some of the films are quite persuasive.
Really?
Uh, but no, I haven't seen it done in front of me firsthand. But that, yeah, I wrote quite a bit. I wrote a book called Human Levitation because I got so darn interested in it. When a family friend said that it happened to her, I found another family friend, and I started interviewing people who'd had this experience and collecting all the data on it. Found over 300 cases. It's a real phenomenon for sure.
I don't know who this is, but I have been newly experiencing visions. So weird, but so much to it.
Yeah, clairvoyance.
Mhm.
I've experienced that as well. Because
Okay.
when you have out of body experiences, it opens up your psychic centers, and you start having dreams that come true,
Wow.
uh, and impressions and visions. Um, and it's awesome when it happens.
So where do you get that from? I mean, you know what I'm saying? What sparked that?
It all started to come hand in hand, sort of
Okay.
all hit me at all sides. Honestly, I got involved in the field of UFO research, and well, I broke into it in '86, but it was before that weird stuff started happening to me. In 1984, my mom passed away. It was tragic. She was quite young, 49, and I was 19, and a young 19, if you know what I mean. I was pretty naive and sheltered and a late bloomer, so to speak. So I was devastated and very skeptical of life after death, and saw her ghost. I saw her spirit at the service for her, and it blew my mind. Well, it didn't. At the time, I thought I was just crazy. I thought I was delusional with grief. I thought I was hallucinating.
Right.
Uh, but I saw her full color apparition. I saw her,
And where
and
was this at that you saw her?
at the service for
At
her,
service. Okay.
yeah, which would be a good place to see to
Yeah.
let me know that she's still around in the years following her death. Let's see, she died in '84. It was about 1986, really, about a year after she died. I started having dreams about her that were very lucid, and she was coming into my room and saying, "Everything's okay. I'm not dead." I'd be like, "You're dead. What are you doing here?" And I thought I was awake, and then I would wake up for real. And that happened over and over again, and that led me into researching out of body experiences. So right when I started researching UFOs, I started having out of body experiences, which I kept quiet about. I mean, not to my family. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going out of body. They're like, no, what UFOs? And now you're saying out of body? Stop. You're going
Enough
off the
already,
deep
huh?
end. I'm like, no, for real, honest. And so it was difficult for them. My UFO research angered some. Well, I wouldn't say angered, but my dad was not happy about it, and my couple of my brothers thought I was crazy for a little while at least, but I
Right.
convinced them. They eventually came around. But
Yeah.
yeah, I got involved in the paranormal pretty much at the same time.
That's pretty cool, dude. You got a very interesting story, man. There's so many arcs and so many little rabbit holes to go down. But we're up on our hour right here. I wanted to ask you, where can people find your books or any of your anything from you that you've written?
Oh, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I appreciate it. I do have a website, prestondennett.weebly.com is the address. 2 N's, 2 T's. But if you just type in my name, it should take you there. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm having a lot of fun with that. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and doing the whole social media thing. My books are on Amazon and other online retailers and bookstores near you. And yeah, I think these are important subjects.
Yeah, yeah.
People are like, oh, I'm skeptical. It doesn't affect me. I'm like, you have yes, it does. If we have crashed UFOs and alien technology is being suppressed, we have healing technology that's affecting you.
Right.
And if you suddenly start having precognition, or going out of your body, that will affect you.
Right.
If the aliens show up and do open official contact, that's going to have a huge effect. Right. This is an important subject. It's going to bust into the mainstream. It is. So I think it's really important people know about this. I had such a hard time in the beginning. That's kind of one of the reasons I do it. Right. It was so shocking for me.
Yeah, so like, speaking of that, and I don't mean to cut you off, what advice would you have for people who are trying to tell their story, but they don't know how to, who probably want to come out and talk about it? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, well, first I would say be calm, be objective, try to overcome any fear you might have. Fear is not going to help you. It alters your perception and it makes it difficult to think objectively. Because if you're having encounters with UFOs and grays coming in, it can be scary, but recognize that they're not here to hurt you. I think that's important. I would definitely recommend writing events down because it's easy to forget this stuff. It's easy to deny it. People will, it's easy to get confused about it, the order of events. Our memory is not perfect. So write it down. Another thing I would recommend is meditation. And if you want to see a UFO, meditate on it. Call out to them. They will hear you if you do this persistently and regularly and are really interested in doing this. If you want to have an out-of-body experience, look up the literature. You can do it. There are places you can go to see ghosts. The Queen Mary is a good example. I went there. It was amazing. We had experiences. All this stuff you can see. If you want to see a UFO, you can. So that would be my advice. Just go ahead, do it, and don't be afraid. Confront it head on and have fun with it.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. So, Mr. Preston, again, I want to thank you for coming on. I know it was kind of last minute when I asked you yesterday, but I'd love to have you on again, maybe next month, November. There's a lot of questions I didn't get a chance to ask you regarding, especially UFOs. I love that subject. I just don't have anyone that I can really talk to quite a bit. I've got plenty of paranormal and Bigfoot friends. Don't have a lot of UFO networking contacts.
Yeah, anytime. We didn't even get into USOs.
Yeah, exactly.
Or schoolyard UFO encounters.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to ask you about like reptilians and the Nordics and stuff like that. If you had any experience with that, but we'll cut it off right here. But because I know we'll talk for another hour, and this hour went by pretty quick, man.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I do appreciate it very much, man. And everyone in the chat room, thanks a lot. Shannon, we saw you there too. So thank you for participating. And everyone else, good night. And we'll see you Thursday. And I'm going to try to get Preston back on for you guys. So thank you again, Preston.
Anytime. Thanks.